The Jazz Age, an influence, a legacy, a story. Beginnings. Ragtime. Ragtime was the music genre that was before the Jazz Age. 1920s jazz developed from ragtime and blues. Ragtime is a musical genre that enjoyed its peak popularity between 1895 and 1918. Its main characteristic trait is its syncopated or ragged rhythm. It began as dance music in the red light districts of African American communities in St. Louis and New Orleans years before being published as popular sheet music for piano. The ragtime composer Scott Joplin became famous through publication in 1899 of the Maple Leaf Rag and a string of ragtime hits such as The Entertainer. Although jazz played in the 1800s was called ragtime. The blues. This genre called blues is also another parent to the 1920s jazz music. This genre, created by African Americans, is one of the few new art forms of modern times, developed at the turn of the century. Ex-slaves sang work songs filled with irony, imagery, and love, offering relief from the tensions of their lives. Many blues singers were recorded by talent scouts as they sang in the fields. Bessie Smith, the greatest of all blues singers, was labeled the Empress of Blues. She recorded in the 1920s. Ma Rainey was known as the Mother of Blues. Blues is the name given to both a musical form and a musical genre that originated in African American communities of primarily the Deep South of the United States around the end of the 19th century. From spirituals, work songs, field hollers, shouts and chants, and rhyme simple narrative ballads. The blues form obituous and jazz. Rhythm and blues and rock and roll is characterized by specific chord progressions, of which the 12-bar blues chord progression is the most common. The first jazz band. The early jazz bands usually included one or more cornets, a trombone, a banjo or guitar, a drum, a string bass, or a tuba. The earliest known jazz band is the original Dixieland Jazz Band. They made the first jazz phonograph record in 1917. The original Dixieland Jazz Band also influenced Benny Goodman, an American jazz and swing musician, clarinetist, and band leader. The first jazz pianists. Many musicians developed jazz ideas while wandering up and down the East Coast and South and Middle West. One of the earliest was pianist James P. Johnson, who made his professional debut in New York City in 1904. Not wisely, but too well. New Orleans. New Orleans is sometimes called the cradle of jazz. Leaders of these bands in New Orleans included the cornetist Buddy Bolden, Bunk Johnson, and Freddie Keppard. New York and Chicago. Cities like New York and Chicago were cultural centers for jazz. It had moved upriver from its birthplace, but it was still heard mainly in Negro dance halls in Harlem and Chicago. In other words, New York, Chicago, and New Orleans were the three main cities for 1920s jazz music. '20s jazz musicians, 11 of them. King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. This is the group where Louis Armstrong originated from. They played the real stuff. The name Creole indicated its origin. The band was almost who's of the best musicians to come north from New Orleans. Johnny Dodds played the clarinet and his younger brother called Baby was on drums. Joe Oliver, the cornet-playing leader, had long been acknowledged for the Crescent City's top brass man, and he had with him a new cornet-playing sensation from down home, a cheerful lad named Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong. The towering figure in jazz as the 20s progressed was, of course, Armstrong himself, considered by many one of the greatest jazz musicians of them all. Born on July 4, 1900, he grew up in the toughest black neighborhood in New Orleans. Before long, even the great King Oliver, and like Bessie Smith, was famous in the Negro world. His great soaring solos and his magnificent trumpet tone remade jazz. In my opinion, his three most famous songs are What a Wonderful World, Hello Dolly, and Is That You, Santa Claus?
Dig, man, there goes Mac the Knife. The shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them a pearly white, just a jackknife.
Bessie Smith. A press agent made up the name Empress of the Blues, but that is what she truly was. She sang with the power and an intensity of feeling unmatched by any other blues singer. Her records sold in the millions, although only in the ghettos of the North. Her sound, as poet Langston Hughes said, was too basic for the general public, and few white people in the 20s even knew her name. The records brought her a great deal of money. In 1923, Bessie Smith recorded Downhearted Blues, which sold over 2 million recordings. Ellington was an American composer, pianist, and bandleader of jazz orchestras. His career spanned over 50 years, leading his orchestra from 1923 until his death. Born in Washington, D.C., he won worldwide fame at the Cotton Club in New York City. in the late 20s. Ellington became one of the most important creative figures in jazz as a composer, arranger, band leader, and pianist.
Paul Whiteman was an American band leader and orchestral director, leader of one of the most popular dance bands in the United States during the 1920s. Whiteman produced recordings that were immensely successful, and press notices often referred to him as the King of Jazz. Using a large ensemble and exploring many styles of music, Whiteman is perhaps best known for his blending of symphonic music and jazz, as typified in his 1924 commissioning and debut of George Gershwin's jazz-influenced Rhapsody in Blue. Later, Whiteman's work on symphonic jazz influenced many jazz musicians either way, directly or indirectly, as diverse as Miles Davis, Gil Evans, the modern jazz quartet, Wynton Marsalis, and other modern artists. Whiteman recorded many jazz and pop standards during his career, including Wang Wang Blues, Mississippi Mud, Rhapsody in Blue, Wonderful One, Hot Lips, Mississippi Suite, and Grand Canyon Suite.
Dearest, I've loved you in vain.
George Gershwin. America's great songwriter George Gershwin produced serious jazz compositions. These works sent the classical music critics into fits. Lawrence Gilman scathingly described Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue as trite, feeble, vapid, fussy, and futile. George Gershwin was an American composer and pianist. Gershwin's compositions span both popular and classical genres, and his most popular melodies are widely known. Perhaps the most musical event of the decade was the premiere of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue at Manhattan's Elysian Hall in the winter of 1924. George Gershwin died tragically at the age of 38. He was the songwriter for and good friend of legendary tap dancer Fred Astaire. Barbaric was an American jazz cornetist, jazz pianist, and composer. With Louis Armstrong and Muggsy Spanner, Barbaric was one of the most influential jazz soloists of the 1920s. Born in Davenport, Iowa, he played with the Wolverines and the bands of Frankie Trombier, Gene Goldkey, and Paul Whiteman. His pure, clean cornet style and keen harmonic sense were years ahead of their time. He was also a fine pianist and composer, best known for In the Mist. Benny Goodman was an American jazz and swing musician, clarinetist, and bandleader known as the King of Swing. In the mid-30s, Benny Goodman led one of the most popular music groups in America. Born in Chicago, he learned to play the clarinet at Hull House and joined Penn Pollock's band at the age of 16. Goodman formed his own band in 1934 and became nationally famous next year by launching the swing era. Benny Goodman made his debut in 1928 with his single "A Jazz Holiday." He is more well known for "Sing, Sing, Sing," which was recorded in 1936 during the swing era.
Life is so uncertain.
Fletcher Henderson was an American pianist, bandleader, arranger, and composer, important in the development of big band jazz and swing music. He was one of the most prolific black orchestra leaders, and his influence was vast. Born in Cuthbert, Georgia, he led his own band during the 1920s and 1930s, but gained his greatest fame as chief arranger for Benny Goodman's band.
Like this, my lips are yours.
Earl Faith Hines was an American jazz pianist and bandleader, born in Dulquisence, Pennsylvania. He developed his trumpet-style piano solos while playing with Louis Armstrong and his own band in the 1920s. His style, featuring hard-hit octaves played by the right hand, influenced many great jazz pianists such as Jess Stacy and Joe Sullivan.
Time is right, love me tonight.
Jack Teagarden, known as Big T and the Swingin' Gate, was a jazz trombonist, bandleader, composer, and vocalist regarded as the father of jazz trombone. Born in Rome, Texas, he taught himself to play the trombone. Teagarden recorded with hundreds of outstanding jazz musicians, including Louis Armstrong and Red Nicholas. He became a powerful influence with his original trombone style and his carefree singing.
Forever, my heart is in your hands, my love is yours to have.
Red Nicholas was an American jazz cornetist, composer, and jazz band leader. Over his long career, Nicholas recorded in a wide variety of musical styles, and critic Steve Leggett described him as an expert cornet player, a solid improviser, and apparently a workaholic, since he is rumored to have appeared on over 4,000 recordings during the 1920s alone. Jazz blues' influence. Bessie Smith's influence. Singers such as Billie Holiday and Janis Joplin were inspired by Bessie Smith. Jazz and blues influenced numerous bands and musicians, including Miles Davis, Otis Redding, Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones, Eric Burdon and the Animals, Bruce Springsteen, Led Zeppelin, Peter Green of Fleetwood Mac, Brian Ferry of Roxy Music, Chicago, the Allman Brothers, Supertramp, Grand Funk Railroad, 10 Years After, Steely Dan, George Thorogood, Canned Heat, Savoy Brown, Humble Pie, Foghat, Lil Feat, Manfred Mann's Earth Band, Lighthouse, The Doors, David Bowie, Foreigner, the J. Giles Band, Motley Crue, Aerosmith, Jefferson Airplane, the Doobie Brothers, Robin Trower, Carlos Santana, Climax Blues Band, Paul Butterfield, Frank Zappa, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, the Yardbirds, and John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Jazz today. Popular musicians such as Mariah Carey, Christina Aguilera, Michael Jackson, and Justin Timberlake have made jazz popular in contemporary style. Music of the Jazz Age. That barbaric music, whether just savage or suggestively silly, the song lyrics capture the high spirits of the decade. In the 20s, jazz songs were considered to be pretty raunchy. Jazz songs seem somehow uncivilized and therefore desirable to the young. Songs appeal to subjects like sex, drinking, smoking, and being wild. Jazz opposition. Not everyone was in favor of jazz music. The older generations looked down upon it. Of course, this behavior and the music that prompted it scandalized the guardians of the nation's morals, and upstate New York preacher fulminated. Jazz may be analyzed as a combination of nervousness, lawlessness, primitive and savage animalism, and lasciviousness. A Columbia University Press professor of music denounced it as the attempt of a joyless industrial civilization to arouse its fatigued positioned minds and its drudgery jaded bodies. Jazz records. This symphonic jazz and most of the other music that passed for jazz in the 20s was not real jazz at all. The real music, like much great art through the centuries, was being produced with great obscurity. It had moved from its birthplace but was still heard mainly in Harlem and Chicago and on records that were labeled race records and only sold in Negro neighborhoods. and while the impresarios of Estra's jazz, such as Paul Reitman, were making $250,000 per year, the real jazzmen were broke.
That's the way I feel today.
The influence of jazz, good and bad, began to spread. Its dissemination was aided by the phonograph record. Dozens of companies vied to get wax on the newly famous Negro star, along with their white imitators. Almost unnoticed amid all the crooch, dancers, and chorus lines, the great music was making its mark on the nation. The phonograph in the 1920s. The phonograph, also called gramophone or record player, is a device introduced in 1877 for the recording and reproduction of sound recordings. The recordings played on such device consist of waveforms that are engraved onto a rotating cylinder or disc. As the cylinder or disc rotates, a stylus or needle traces the waveforms and vibrates to reproduce the recorded sound waves. Phonographs were commonly used in the 1920s to listen to records. And that means jazz, everybody.
In our mountain greenery where God paints the scenery, just two crazy people together. While you love your lover, let blue skies be your cover. Let when it rains, we laugh at the weather. And if you're good, I'll search for wood so you can cook while I stand looking. Beans could get no keener reception in a beanery blessed.
Jazz clubs and venues. A jazz club is a venue where the primary entertainment is the performance of live jazz music. Jazz clubs have been in large rooms in the eras of orchestral jazz and big band jazz, and when its popularity as a dance music was common. Major Harlem jazz clubs and venues included the Cotton Club, Saratoga Club, Lafayette, Alhambra Ballroom, the Savoy, Connie's Inn, and Old Ye Nest. Chicago jazz clubs include Green Mill, Cocktail Lounge, Friars Inn, and the Velvet Lounge.
From life's machinery, then our mountain greenery home. When the world was young, oh, Father Adam with sin would grapple, so we're entitled to just one apple. I mean to make applesauce. Underneath the bough, we'll learn a lesson from Mr. Omar. Beneath the eyes of no pa and no ma, old Lady Nature is boss. And if you're good, I'll search for wood so you can cook while I stand looking. Beans could get no keener reception in the beanery blend.
was a papa soul, let those funny people smile. How can there be a Virgin Isle with diggy diggy doo, diggy doo doo, diggy diggy doo, diggy doo.
Suddenly, Harlem was the thing. Its shows, as Variety proclaimed, had pep, pulchritude, punch, and presentation, and white people from downtown flocked northward to see them, especially the elaborate revenues at Connie's Inn and the Cotton Club, both nightclubs catering mainly to white customers. Other clubs, of course, welcomed Harlem's own people, and one dance hall, the Savoy, and one theater, the Lafayette, became hubs of nightlife. The rage to visit Harlem to see Negro entertainment was triggered in 1921 when a superb musical show called Shuffle Along, written, produced, and performed by Negroes, was a smash hit on Broadway. It was followed within a 4-year period by 8 other Negro shows, including Liza, Running Wild, and Chocolate Dandies.
The one on my mind is the man of my dreams. Where is he? I wish that I knew. Why should he hide the man of my dreams? Won't somebody guide the man of my dreams? Rise to me and make dreams come true. There's a million lovers, but I'm alone. When will I discover?
the radio business. As late as 1919, the radio audience was scattering of avid hobbyists, listening to earphones to barely audible crystal sets. Yet in a new decade, radio quickly became a big business, twice over in fact as hardware for home entertainment and as a medium for advertising. Radio had its practical beginning in 1920 when station KDKA in Pittsburgh announced the returns of the Harding-Cox presidential election. Inspired by this modest triumph, KDKA began first regularly scheduled broadcasting of the news, church services, and music. Radio was another way for people like us could listen to jazz in the 20s, especially for people who couldn't afford to buy jazz records. Some could only afford to own a radio, or some knew a friend who owned one.
That sound is heard more often by more people than any other sound in America. Pulsing out from the transmitter tower into the tubes and coils behind your radio dial, whoever, wherever you may be. It's like a welcome knock on the door and the sound of the familiar voice of an old friend. He denied that its voice was a whisper crackling with static. And you stayed up till 3, scratching a crystal with a wire cat's whisker to log Pittsburgh, 50 miles away. And then radio moved up from the cellar to the parlor, its earphones replaced by a handsome cone speaker, big enough for Dad to get his whole head in as he still tried for distance. Maybe Cincinnati direct on a clear evening. The freedom of every American to turn the switch on his radio and listen without a license to what he pleases when he pleases, and to pay no tribute for what he hears, was guaranteed by the Constitution more than 100 years before the first practical sputter was ever coaxed out of the electromagnetic wave. The freedom of the air in America is inalienable. To extend this American freedom into new and uncharted wavelengths,
millions in America today find in radio broadcasting an indispensable source of entertainment and information. To those shut in from other amusement, it is the great blessing of the modern age. More than 18 million receiving sets in the nation await the turn of a dial to convert into music or speech the radiation from nearly 600 broadcasting stations. People of every age, in every walk of life, in every nook and corner of the United States, constitute the vast radio audience of America, assembling all day long, outdoors as well as in the shelter of the home, to hear some part of radio's 18-hour program. And this audience has grown from thousands to many millions in only a dozen years, for broadcasting as an industry dates back only to 1922.
Now that their homework is finished and the dinner dishes put away, this boy and girl have ample time to enjoy their favorite programs. Let me repeat, they are enjoying the program. Mother and father are enjoying a bridge game with some friends. One of the principal rules in this house is that a radio or phonograph is heard only in the room in which it is played.
There's one piece of good news I count on every night. It never grows old, it's timeless as life itself. You can't measure it or define it, and my own words could never convey it.
The Legacy. The Jazz Age in film/animation. The Jazz Age would later influence Fleischer Studios and Looney Tunes, and in many Hollywood motion pictures such as The Public Enemy and Young Man with the Horn. Betty Boop, the Flapper. Max Fleischner created Betty Boop as a caricature of jazz singer Helen Kane, and people frequently compared Betty Boop to actress Clairvaux. Betty Boop made her first appearance on August 19th, 1930. Boop boop a boopy doo.